Good afternoon. Hello. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for this call, for this presentation. I'm just to say calls because we used to have these virtually, so it's very nice to have you all here in person, and all of the speakers that we have been working together for the past years. Finally, we have them in person here, and we can have a nice discussion together. My name is Luca De Giovanetti, and I work at the WBCSD on the decarbonization of the built environment. And today we want to present you the work that we did together with Arup, but also with other members of WBCSD on the net zero building. So where do we stand? And then the second question will be on where do we need to go? What's next? So the session is also live, can be for the people joining us live. Hi. So yeah, the first part we'll have Chris. He will have a fireside chat with our speakers on the three main topics that we have identified within the project. The important aspect of data, targets, and collaboration. Then after that, we will have a panel discussion where Joe Da Silva will be moderating the discussion with the speakers about how low we can go. So first part, where we are. Second, where we can go. So first, quick introduction of our work. So what we have done at WBCSD, an important part of our work is really to create this common language, common narrative for where do we stand at the moment and where do we need to go. So the built environment is responsible for 40% of global CO2 emission. And that's an important number to remember because it's really kind of a big part of the problem, but also a big part of the solution. So, and in this 40%, there is, of course, the embodied carbon, so the gray carbon in the material, and the energy used in building. Where do we need to go? We need to halve emission by 2030 and reach net zero by 2050. So, to get that, we have two key enablers. One, a common vision, and the second one, the importance of collaboration. Really to collaborate within the system and across the different stakeholders in the system. So making sure that the collaboration across all parties is strengthened. And to drive that market transformation, we have identified, this work was done together with the Global Alliance for Building and Construction. We have the three key levers. One, align beyond all life carbon. The second part, integrate carbon cost and price in the discussion, in the decision. And the third part is really to transform the supply-demand side. How do we ensure that there is stronger demand for the vision that we want to achieve? Stronger demand for net zero building. So all these 3 points are actually also part of the work that we have done because of the importance of all life carbon, the cost, and so on. So with that said, thank you for this introduction. And then I'm going to call now Chris on stage for speaking with our speakers. So I'm going to call in Chris Carroll, which is the director for building engineering at Arup. And then also I call already all the speakers. So Anna Ekeson, Senior Environmental Manager at Skanska. Esther Ann, Chief Sustainable Officer at City Development Limited. And Mike De Silva, Sustainability Manager at Bechtel. Yeah.
Is this on? Yeah. So we completed recently our first major piece of work with the WBCSD, which is the case study report that we're going to talk to today. And the case study report had two initial aims. One was to support the building system carbon framework that the WBCSD had recently published, which is a global methodology, a common methodology for how you measure and report whole life carbon. So not just the operational carbon, but also the embodied carbon, the carbon involved in the construction as well as the operation of the building. The second aim of the report was to case study 6 real projects and look at them in detail and share the results very openly, very transparently. In doing so, kind of demonstrate what a whole life carbon assessment actually looks like. Because what we found when we first started the work was lots of people were saying they were doing this, but they weren't. They were measuring parts and they were measuring inconsistently, and the data was very, very skewed. And actually we found in doing this process, which was useful in its own right, the difficulty involved in actually doing this work, in actually analysing and reporting very clearly and consistently the whole life carbon footprint of the building projects. So to put it into context, this is one particular project case study summary. This was an all-electric building that we'd recently finished in London, an office building. It's pretty efficient, and actually you see from the graph here, this is the operational carbon. This is the embodied carbon to build the building up to practical completion. And this is the embodied carbon in maintaining that building through its lifetime. So that you can see all of a sudden idea of the carbon footprint of a project is starting to change through looking at these projects. And the thing we would say is you haven't got a whole life carbon assessment of your project unless you can fill in the whole framework. So unless you know the embodied carbon of the services, as well as the facade, as well as the structure. And we were actually surprised ourselves at how much embodied carbon is in some of the other components that aren't being measured and reported at the moment. And that's important because that tells us stuff about how we design for low carbon going forward. So I will now open up to Anna, a colleague, a fellow member of the WBCSD from Skanska, and ask Anna the first of our questions here, which is what's Skanska's perspective on the importance of whole life carbon, and should it be mandatory for future projects?
Thanks, Chris. I think that's really relevant questions. As you know, we have discussed this many times. I very much think that, yes, we should have whole life carbon calculations on all of our projects. And saying that, I'm one of those who tried to get you numbers and figures for the study, and it wasn't as easy as we thought. We do calculations in Skanska, and our aim is to do it on all projects that are big enough for being projects that are big enough for having a calculation done for them. And we do a lot of very small projects too, and at the moment I think that's not valuable on doing that. But I think if we look at how we did when we implemented energy measurements, that was really hard in the beginning, and we didn't think that that could be something we'd do for all projects, but that is something we very naturally do for all projects at the moment. So I would say that we have started now. We've discussed for a long time, and now we are starting to actually measure, and that's what we have to do to be able to know what we're talking about and what we need to reduce.
What do you see as the key barriers to doing this on every project? So if we're to do this, going forward, starting next year on every single project, what are the barriers?
Agreeing on what to take into the calculations and how to make the calculations. And I think we're on good start with the slide you showed earlier with where we've set a framework where we're starting to actually decide what to measure and how to measure it, and when we need to do assumptions, because there are assumptions that are needed to be done, that we do them in a common way, and that we have a transparent and common understanding of how and what. That's one barrier, and I think we're trying to work with that. The other is the knowledge and expertise and understanding of this in our industry, because I think we need to increase that to be able to get people to understand all the fantastic knowledge that we have and can do more with to actually reduce.
Yeah. And where does Skanska currently stand with regards to measuring its projects? And what are you developing things specifically internally to improve things and make measurement better, data collection better, data sharing better?
Yeah, we have very different markets. So when we're in the Nordic markets, they have for quite some while been doing calculations. Maybe not always whole life carbon calculations, but carbon calculations. So there is rather a large knowledge and a good process in how to do that. And there are a number of different tools that you can use to make those calculations. In other markets, it's not such as, the level is not such on such a level, what do you say? It's not such as mature in other of our markets. And so, for example, in the US market, we have, together with Microsoft and other stakeholders, developed a tool called EC3 that measures embodied carbon. And that's one of the steps that we need to take to start to look in the whole life carbon cycle. So we're trying to figure out what way to do it in separate markets to actually get it done, not just talking about it, but actually doing it.
Okay, thank you. And then moving from data gathering, data sharing, and the importance of that, one of the other key messages that we found in doing our case study report was the proposition that targets are becoming important, and that we have to get to a point where we have clearer targets that are aligned with an understanding of how we can improve things, where we stand, and how we can get to this position Luca was talking about of halving everything. What does half of something look like? And actually, those targets, Luca, are you working the slides? Sorry, mate. How do those targets actually align with net zero and a genuine kind of systems-wide idea of net zero and decarbonising to a point of net zero? So these are some other results extracted from the case study report. The one on the left is the amalgamation, the average of the 6 case studies. And the 6 case studies are a collection of office buildings, steel, concrete, one timber building, refurbishment buildings. So they're a real cross-section. And this is the average of the carbon footprint at the end of practical completion, so just under 600 kilos of carbon per square metre, broken down into the different components. And this is the carbon footprint, embodied carbon footprint through life. So we add another 2/3 to that from that starting point as we retrofit, as we refurbish the building services within the building, as we add and replace facade. So I think we have to start thinking about all of this in the context of what good looks like, what our ambition is for 2030 if we're talking about net zero, if we're talking about halving things, and establish targets around this. Next slide. And similarly in terms of operational carbon, so these are the 6 case studies, and this is their energy use intensity. So this is measured in kilowatt hours per square metre as you measure energy. And importantly, this captures everything. So this is not just the regulated energy, this is the energy that's used at plugs by tenants. So it's the whole energy use within the building. So this was difficult data to get hold of, actually, and we have to improve how we do that. But actually we have to, the average across the case studies is probably about 120 kilowatt hours per square metre, which we would question isn't good enough, actually. And if our aim is to bring down demand to meet a clean supply, we have to start rapidly doing better than this with the performance of our buildings. Next slide, please, Luca. And then finally on this is really important. This is the timeline of a building, showing in green the embodied carbon and in grey the operational carbon from the energy use intensity. And a really important fact here is that when we do a major refurbishment or a new construction, about a third of the carbon is emitted instantaneously, right at the start of the process. So we really have to have a spotlight. If we're really interested in decarbonising, we really have to have a spotlight on the embodied carbon. And actually across, this is the average of the 6 projects again, and across those 6, embodied is 50% of the carbon as compared to operational, but as you say, it's emitted sooner. So from that extract, I'll go to the next question, which is, I guess, where within your organisation, Esther, where do you see kind of setting targets? Where do you see the establishment of net zero in terms of the buildings that you're taking to market?
Well, definitely, this is really quite a challenge, and we started the green building journey almost 2 decades ago. If I can have the second slide, Luca. I'm not going into the details of this, but just to show you the painful journey, that 20 years, we have actually learned a lot, especially when we set the SBTi target in 2017. It took us almost 8 months to, get it approved by SBTi, and we also learned a lot through the process. We are not just looking at Scope 1, Scope 2, but also Scope 3. And I would say that we are located in Singapore, in part of the ASEAN region. And I wouldn't say that the industry is very, very advanced as much as the, Scandinavian and Europe. But for us, we are actually really pushing the agenda because we started a bit earlier. And I wouldn't, go into the great detail, but more on the 2018. That is actually the milestone that we have actually set the SBTi validated target, a very challenging target based on 2 degrees. That was before IPCC called for 1.5 degree at the end of 2018. And we actually did the climate change scenario planning as well based on 2 and 4 degree. And after that, we actually started the second study from 2019 onwards based on 1.5 degree and 2 degree, looking at the financial impact and all. But before we completed it, actually in 2020, we were hit by COVID. Everybody was affected. So, disruption to, supply chain and all that. So now we are actually starting the 3rd study, which also looking at, climate related and also, social challenge as well. So if I can look at the next slide, that how do we scope the whole pledge to World Green Building Council advancing net zero? We follow the framework, the 5 pillar, and we need to be ambitious, but we also want to be prudent as a listed company. So that's why we have the target set quite clearly, that basing on our 13 existing building, not new building. New building with new technology and all that is not as challenging as, advancing net zero for some older existing building. So we actually set the target for 13 existing building, about 240,000 square meter of space, and was 16,000 tons of CO2, and also including our corporate office as well. So this is the scope we are looking at, and of course the pathway is very clear. And the method that we are looking at the action plan is to raise energy efficiency. Don't forget that we are next to the equator. It's throughout the year very hot. We cannot tell the tenants that, sorry, we have to, switch off the aircon for you. So we have to look at energy efficiency, look at new technology, innovation, and of course, renewable energy. Again, Singapore is RE challenged country. We have very limited space, and so we have to look at, off-site and on-site. We have to look at, district cooling, many different type of technology to help us to, work towards the race to zero. So we set this target, not overly ambitious, but more prudent. And if we can achieve that, we are happy to push the agenda to 2050. and to green the other, to push the agenda for our 100 over hotels and properties worldwide.
Yeah. Do you see a place for legislation in kind of driving these numbers in terms of really kind of pushing things towards net zero?
Yes, along the value chain, regulator, I must say that it can change things overnight. So we have the Green Plan in Singapore. We launched it in February. So we have the very clear target that's set by the government. By 2030, 80% of all buildings in Singapore has to be green building, not quite net zero, green building first. And at the moment, we are only 40%. So how do we green the rest? And as property owner, we have to really drive change, and that will be, about your license to operate. So regulator definitely can drive change overnight. Then the other, driver that can really make things happen is our investors. Yeah, so you can look at our, largest asset manager. Larry Fink already make it very clear. Yep. Investing companies are expected to have a net zero strategy, not a climate strategy. Otherwise, you will risk being divested. So investors, regulators are very key drivers for change.
That's great. If you could move on the slide there, Luca. So I guess the last of the key messages that we're drawing out today from the report is the necessity for achieving the kind of widest possible collaboration. Individual players can't move things on in the same way that organisations collaborating together can. We work in a business that has generally quite low margins, and I think collectively we have to come together to push things on. Within the value chain, there are people who can influence. There are clients who can set briefs. There are investors who bring finance to play. So there's a whole system of collaborators there, and there is also we found from the case study report. Say in terms of embodied carbon, there are a very limited number of materials actually that have the biggest footprint. So also focused collaboration around where we get the best bang for our buck is something we should maybe pay more attention to. So Mike, how can better industry-wide collaboration push the net zero agenda further and faster?
Right, Chris. Yeah, and it's an interesting and huge challenge for us all. And but I would start by saying that we operate in the architects, engineers, and construction space, and collectively, we've recognised that our footprint is in the Scope 3, and we need to do something about it. So that is starting to be addressed. I'm in the process of doing a piece of work for the World Building Council at the moment, reaching out to members and non-member companies actually to find out what they're doing to take, accounting for that Scope 3 and also accountability for that Scope 3, and really trying to capture that best practice. And we hope to see that manifest itself in some case studies that we'll be publishing through the WBC, SD, in the new year. So, first of all, I would say, in best practice, it's starting to happen. Companies are recognizing it. Just to, give a bit of a name check on a few of them, but I would say if there's anybody here in the audience who has good case studies, please make it known, and we'd be more than happy to incorporate those to help collaborate and spread the word on good practice. But, AECOM, for example, being reached out to them, they have what they call the Rule of Six and Scope X, which is all about looking at this life cycle carbon and supporting their value chain in that journey. Grimshaw as well on net zero carbon pathways. They've just developed a tool, and for my own company, Bechtel, we've just built a tool called Clean Build, which looks at interventions in the construction and in the engineering space, whereby we can reduce that Scope 3 carbon. So, we appreciate that that's where the problem is. We recognise it. We started to build the tools to drive that forward. So we're very much ready to act on it. And I would just add one additional thing in terms of what's the framework for all this. Well, we've got the greenhouse gas protocols. You know, we've got ISO 14064. We've got a publicly available standard called PAS 2080. Now, in the UK, we're very familiar with this, but you know, I think that it's something that does, you know, could be promoted more globally. And again, it provides a very good collaborative framework for really identifying the roles of the different players in the value chain and a number of interventions that they can actually take in addressing this particular issue. And it breaks that circle of blame, importantly. It looks at the responsibilities for everybody in that value chain.
Okay, and are there specific barriers that you see preventing the widest possible collaboration? And how might we remove these? And, you know, could specific government legislation maybe support things better in terms of collaboration?
Yeah, I think we're going to have a bit of a common theme here on the role of the regulator. No, absolutely, you know, and there's some great work, as I've just mentioned, you know, happening, but we really need to accelerate it. And, you know, I believe that the only way that can be done is through that regulatory role. When I go out and speak to developers and various other people in the supply chain, that's what they're asking for, you know, quite frankly. Everybody wants to be able to understand what the problem is, know what the regulation is, the targets that they have to meet, whether it's, you know, building performance, etc. And then they can all tackle this on a level playing field. You know, at the moment, it's very difficult to do that. So you're suddenly in a position that you have to think about, you know, Chris mentioned low margins. You know, am I going to remain competitive? You know, we need to be able to take that away, and we need to be able to sell our skills on the other things that we do well as the companies that we are in that space, architects, engineers, contractors. You know, can we deliver on time? Can we deliver on budget? You know, focus on those key things. But let's not make this a differentiator. We all need to work together to address this really acute problem.
Thank you, Mike. I'd like to thank all three of my fellow members for their insight on the report. I'd like to urge people to download the report and read it. It's unapologetically data heavy, I think, as a report. So lots of numbers, lots of graphs, but we're not apologising about that, because that's where we need to be. I'm going to now hand over to Dame Jo Da Silva, a colleague of mine at Arup, who, Luca, you're going to introduce this session. And I think my fellow members are going to be grilled further by Dame Jo.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, welcoming Dame Jo Da Silva. She's the Global Sustainability Development Director at Arup. And the panelists will stay the same. But we also have, joining from South Africa, from Cape Town, we have Lisa Reynolds. She's the CEO of the Green Building Council South Africa. Hi, Lisa. Good to see you again. Long time no seen. And so, yeah.
Hi, Luca.
Please. Hi, Jo.
Thank you, Luca. I'm Jo Da Silva. I'm the Global Sustainable Development Director at Arup, and my role is to push Arup as hard as I can to do more. And I think there are people in this room who are playing similar roles within their own organization. We've talked about, so far, about the importance of measuring carbon associated with the built environment. You know, that old adage, if we don't measure it, we can't manage it. The report that Chris referred to was a big wake-up call for us in Arup. It made us really realize that up until that report, we hadn't really understood where the carbon was in the buildings that we're designing. Now we know where it is, and it's not just in the structure and the foundations, it's in the building services, it's in the fit-out. And that means that we're in a much better place to make decisions about reducing carbon. And I'm really pleased to kick off this session by saying that there was an announcement earlier today where Arup announced that from now on, we're making whole life carbon a mandatory part of all the work that we do. Because we don't think that we can move forwards and be responsible and accountable for our contribution unless we do that as a first step. And I hope by doing that, we're going to generate a lot of data, much, much more than the 6 case studies that Chris talked about, which we can then share and help drive change throughout the industry. But no one organization can do it alone. And I think what's special about this panel is we have representation here from Scandinavia, from Asia, from Europe. And I'm delighted that Lisa Reynolds has been able to join us from South Africa, because Africa is a critical part of our need to address decarbonization across the industry. And Lisa, I just thought I would like to begin with you. The others have all had a chance to speak, and ask you a question from the perspective of Africa. How do you think that measuring carbon on our buildings is actually going to change practice in Africa?
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation to talk. I think, Anna said that she spoke about the mature sort of Nordic market, and I think in Africa we're probably still in primary or secondary school as far as maturity along this line goes. But it makes it's very important for Africa. Obviously, we always say that Africa is going to be the place that really feels the effect of that 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees at most. So we are very, very, what can I say, happy, and we follow these kind of things. I love the concept of the Arab report, because we learn lessons. We might be behind, but everything that we can learn, everything that we can see, everything that can be measured is what we want to do. Because if I look at it, we have the same thing with regulation in South Africa and in Africa, where there's these, in South Africa, I think it was 2009, our National Development Plan said that we should have net zero carbon buildings by 2030. But then there's a gap in the implementation of how to get there. I remember spending hours explaining or trying to decide what is net zero carbon, what is carbon neutrality, and that's sort of sometimes where we're at. And what these kind of reports do, what meetings at places like COP26 does, is give us those tools to be able to measure these things, to be able to find some commonality in it, to find some definitions into what we're all talking about. And I think that's vital to what we need to do. So as I say, we might be in primary and secondary school, but we're on a really, really fast learning curve.
Thank you, Lisa. And I think the Green Building Council is really doing a fantastic job of sharing knowledge across the world and setting the bar higher with the net zero buildings commitment.
Absolutely. I just want to throw in here, we do have some net zero buildings in South Africa, but again, we put out the net zero sort of rating tool in 2016, and we probably only got sort of 10 net zero carbon buildings. So it's the uptake's slow, but it is there.
Thank you, Lisa. We've talked about sort of understanding where we are now, but of course the next challenge is, where are we going? We're clear about the targets we need to reach by 2030, but the question I keep asking ourselves is, how fast can we go? How low can we go? And we know that we've got to reduce carbon, and we've got to start reducing carbon, radically this year, over the next 3 years. And I keep wondering, in 5 years' time, when we're at COP31, if we as a panel were to fast forward 5 years, what would we be wanting to see in 5 years' time? And how do we think that putting carbon up front and center of the discussions in our industry alongside cost might actually change the agenda? And what are our organizations actually respectively focusing on over the next 1, 3, 5 years, rather than just looking to the destination that we've got to get to? Anna, am I able to start with you on that question, put you on the spot?
Absolutely.
Skanska have been leading the way to date, but where are you going?
I think it's going much faster than we anticipated, which is very good, but it's also a bit scary, because we don't really know. We just know we have to go down there to zero, and that we need to reduce, and we need to do it fast. And I think what's positive is that we are realizing that it's doable, Now we just need to speed up in an organized way so that we actually do this the best way, not just run. And I think one of the ways is to look into, as we saw Chris present earlier, where do we have the big parts? Where do we get the most buck for the bang, or bang for the buck? And what we have realized is that we need to look very much into materials. And when we're doing that, we also find that there are possibilities of reducing emissions from, for example, concrete. Asphalt is another heavy polluter where you can, instead of having bitumen, use a fossil-free binder instead to make sure that you reuse the right asphalt and lower the emissions very, very fast and a lot. So I think for us at Skanska, it's about defining where we get the most out of it. And I really like your view of not just talking about the cost, but also the carbon. I have a vision that when I succeed, that's when we, on all budgets and on all projects, we have that bottom line. And it's not just the money, it's also the carbon in real lifetime. So when we change something in our prospects or drawings, we see definitely and directly how it affects the money, but also the carbon, so that we can have a discussion in real time around this. But that's when I think that's when we are on the right spot.
A dual accounting mechanism.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. So Esther, as a client for organizations like Arup, as a developer, if we brought in a dual accounting mechanism so that the designs that you were presented with, the projects that you were trying to realize, instead of just being about how much they cost, it was also about how much carbon was involved. Do you think that would change the decision making within your organization?
Definitely, yeah. I mean, this reminds me of our journey of sustainability reporting, which report ESG, for 14 years now. And of course, there's a saying that accountants can save the world. So we have to be very calculative about ESG. And now, of course, we talk about green building. Because even for green building, I think it is easier to quantify numbers rather than governance. So I think definitely, if you ask me 5 years later, I would hope that we present the data just now. We are halfway there. And then I wouldn't say that every building has the same formula. Just to give you an example that just for the past 3 months, we managed to sign a PPA, a power purchase agreement, for a 30-year-old industrial building. Okay, so the whole rooftop, we're going to install all the solar panels and all with a partnership with a Singapore leading solar panel company. So after we installed it by next quarter, it's projected that we can actually transition to RE by 50% of the building's consumption. So we learn to be very calculative now. Everything we do, we must have a target. And to tell you the truth, after February, we pledged for net zero. I always have nightmare to see zero. So I think we need to work together and need to be quite innovative. Technologies are there, but the economic benefits and the human benefits have to work hands in hand because we are private sector. I cannot, I cannot say that I have to, save the world at all costs. If we can't maintain sustainable our business, who is going to suffer? Our employees will suffer. So we need to, strike that balance of planet, people, and profits. And of course, I think when we talk about reporting, we can't talk about by 2029, I tell you whether I can achieve it by 2030. So it's an annual reporting for our ESG, sustainability reporting. Even I don't want to report it, the investor won't let you go. Every year, we have to dish out all our data. In fact, if you go to our website, we have a quarterly update as well for the biggest, the broadest targets and goals. So I think we are living in a very transparent world. Very number-focused world. And especially as listed company, we really have to answer, get ready, all the data. Investors are going to grill you. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think that sort of combination of actually measuring success in terms of profit, planet, and people is really important and echoes sort of Mark Carney's view that it's about reducing carbon, managing carbon risk, and that's the way to assure your future revenues. And I think that's really, really good points. Can I ask you, Mike? As Bechtel, as a contractor, you're at the end, or not quite the end. There's the material suppliers at the end of this value chain that we talk about. Do you sort of sit there and feel we can't do very much. We can maybe influence what we purchase in terms of materials as a purchaser, but actually, you know, what we really need to do, there's only so much action we can take, that what we need is more things to happen further up the value chain. And what are you doing to influence what happens in the industry?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, we're seeing the value chain upside and kind of down from us. And, you know, one thing I would say is, you know, I'm in the infrastructure part of the business, but we are very dependent, say, on our metals and mining part of the business as well. So there's a big decarbonisation that we can support that part of the industry in, because they're supplying into infrastructure. Similarly, within in the energy sector, and increasingly working on the energy transition. So again, through the energy transition, we're able to decarbonise upstream for the products, materials that are being used in our infrastructure projects. So that's one part that we're doing, making sure that we're looking at that much more holistically across the organisation. We've also reached out to all parts of the organisation in terms of, you know, our engineering. We're reviewing all our processes and procedures in engineering, in construction. We're working very closely with our project controls colleagues as well, because they are they gather the data, and they're the people who put the data in front of the senior managers, the project directors, etc. They've got their schedule data, they've got the cost data, and we want to bring the carbon data up there as well. So it's visible, it's in people's faces, and give it a currency. You know, that's absolutely vital. And in our procurement, again, working very closely with our procurement teams. Now, the message, you know, through procurement, again, we can't just switch off our supply chain overnight because they're not performing. It's a journey. We need to support and work with them. So again, we've started that outreach. But I think an important thing for me is, you know, Bechtel alone or Arup alone or, you know, anybody alone, we're not, Skanska alone, we're not going to achieve this. A key thing in this, that we all need to be singing from the same hymn sheet. We all these supply chains converge at some point. We all need to be giving them a clear and consistent message about what we want. That gives them the confidence then to invest in innovation, development of their products and materials. When they've got that confidence, they can go to their investors, and it gives the investors the confidence as well that they can invest in this and they can see a return on their money. You know, so we've got to collaborate through, you know, at all levels, because that's the only way we'll really accelerate on this.
Yeah. And I think that collaboration is probably also about sharing stories. It's inspiring to hear the three of you speak, because you're working hard. It is difficult. It sounds difficult, but by actually delving into the detail, you're actually finding new ways forwards and overcoming those obstacles and creating the change that we need. Lisa, I just wanted to go back to you, and I wish you could be here with us in a very hot room here in very cold Glasgow. But I just wanted to hear from you in terms of when you look ahead to the next 1, 3, 5 years and the pace of urbanization that's happening across Africa and the real need for new buildings, but at the same time the need to make sure that those new buildings don't contribute to big increases in carbon globally. What are the things that the GBC is doing to drive low carbon construction of what needs to be new construction? Here in Glasgow, we can talk about the priority being retrofitting or not building at all, but that's not an option in Africa.
Thanks for that, Jo. We've got quite a bit of renewing of buildings to do, but as you say, with the sort of rapid urbanization, you know, cities like the city of Johannesburg is going to one of these huge mega cities, they say, about 2050 because of the urbanization. And, you know, what we do, and you touched on it earlier, is really, you know, we're looking at all these different parties, and we feel at the Green Building Council, we can be somewhat of a pivot or a place where all of this information can reside, and so that we can, again, give out that information, give education. We do a lot of advocacy within South Africa and within Africa on where we're going. We speak to bodies like the African Union and sort of different governments within Africa. because I think it's, again, we have to plan these things. And as you said, we can't just look at, say, a 2030 target without having a map with milestones to get there. And I think the planning part of it, and I think also the embracing of different ways of building is really important. In Africa and in especially South Africa, we love our traditional ways of building, which is very much like the UK, sort of real solid buildings. We haven't, when we start speaking about embodied carbon, eyes glaze over, and we have to really try and persuade them that this is a conversation that we have to have. And looking at different ways of building, and I think looking at different ways of building for all. Because one of the challenge we have as well is when people think of innovative buildings, they always think of going sort of to the affordable housing sector instead of saying, let's look at the total building sector and find out new ways to build. But I think the biggest thing is we need to put a little bit more planning into this growth and understanding of the impact of each step and each milestone that we have to go through to get to where we want to go to.
Thank you, Lisa. I think that point you make about, needing to think about buildings for all is perhaps something we overlook. We talk about buildings in general, but actually, when I think about buildings, I think of the different types of buildings. There's commercial property, there's housing, a lot of which is non-engineered. And then, of course, there's the social infrastructure, the schools, the hospitals, the police stations. All those types of buildings that are part of the fabric of society. If we're going to really drive down emissions in the next 5 years, where do you think, which of those sectors do you think we should be tackling as a priority? Or do you think we should be tackling all three simultaneously? Or is there different roadmaps for those three? What's the next step that we should be collaborating on, rather than roadmaps for our organizations, but in terms of roadmaps for the industry? Anna.
Maybe I can start. I think one way, we need to focus on all of them, of course, but focusing on too much have a tendency of not focusing on anything. So I think what you were talking about, police stations, hospitals, schools, and all of that, when we do build new ones, those should be zero now, from tomorrow or today. And I think that's, as I spoke about, the knowledge and level of understanding around this is something that we can work on in educating and having this conversation so that we in the public procurement get very clear statements around this. And if we're talking about halving and how do we get there, I think that's one way there where we definitely can make a difference, and we can start now, today.
Esther.
Could I add on?
Yeah,
As a landlord, we need to look at the users. We also build home. So whether you are in the real estate sector, you have an impact on your, how, the carbon footprint of your living or working space. In fact, studies show that 90% people spend about 90% indoor. So for home and working space, you can make a difference. And in fact, we started engaging tenants to adopt green lease since 2014, with about 60% participation. And after 3 years, we achieved 100%. And since 2017 until now, nobody opt out because tenants also have to report their carbon footprint, and there's also cost of inaction. If you don't do it, the carbon tax is coming your way, and a lot of MNC also have to come up with their sustainability reports. So we are working together with building users, and of course for home, we provide all the facility for them to do recycling and all, but you need to educate them. That is where the art come into the picture. If you even give them a pneumatic system to segregate normal waste and recyclable waste. And at home you have the granny, you have the children, and they just, mix all the waste together. So you need really education. So I always feel that, like, dealing with climate, it's really a combination of art and science. How do you deal with people, and how do you come up with infrastructure, and also how do you calculate the carbon footprint and track, and in fact it's also about accountancy, not just art and science, but also accountancy. Yeah.
Oh, see, I like that art to science. Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I'm with Anna on this in terms of public buildings. I think there's no excuse for them not being zero carbon. Anything moving forward now through the planning system, zero carbon. But we shouldn't forget the housing challenge. And of course, we've got a growing population throughout the world, and housing will continue to be a big challenge. Now, there is that issue of cost. And that will always come up. But we need to start thinking of this in terms of total cost of ownership rather than the capital cost. And I think we need to do more about articulating that. And I mean, can we be more creative with mortgages, for example, and having sort of a clearly broken out element of the mortgage that is clearly identifiable as relating to the savings that you're making on your energy, so that when you get your energy bills through, you can actually match your energy bills against that saving that you're making, which you're paying through a part of your mortgage payment. It just gives visibility to the person that they're actually paying off the cost of running and operating their homes. So I think there's probably a few things that we can do there to make that what seems like an additional capital cost less painful when you look at it in those sort of whole life ownership terms.
Yeah, absolutely. So things can translate from one part of the industry to the other side. I like the idea of whole life ownership, and it's a sort of counteract for people buying properties just as an investment. I want to go back to this idea of putting carbon right at the center of the conversation. There was a forum in this room earlier today where we talked about the fact that you would never ever go about buying a building or starting a building project without there being a budget, and a budget with a dollar sign or a pound sign or a euro sign in front of it. Can any of you envisage how far away do you think it'll be before a project doesn't even start without a carbon budget? So I'm waiting for the day as Arup. When am I going to get a brief that says, we're looking for a new building, or we want to refurbish our building. We've got an approximate budget of X million dollars, but we also want to make sure that the carbon footprint of this building is net zero or even net positive. Have any of you created briefs like that, encountered briefs like that? And how far off in the distance is that? I don't want to put Anna on the spot, and Mike looks like he's jumping to answer.
Well, I'll put out a call to arms there. Why not the first brief that goes out tomorrow should have that in there? We've got to start now. This is very urgent. So there's no excuses for not doing it. I would like to see a brief like that tomorrow. I would say personal view, but but we do need to be really aggressive at this. So we need to.
Yeah.
I think the economic benefits is getting, very clear now. And of course, UNEP-FI, we are looking at 3 areas. One is, of course, a responsible, investment is key. What investor wants, we have to, dish out, meet their expectation. And the other one is actually responsible lending. Every business will need financial support. Then the third one is actually gaining traction, which is sustainable insurance. When we look at buying property, you don't just look at, wow, seafront, beautiful view. You have to look at, hey, is that rising sea level risk, So we are actually engaging our investor boys that don't just look at, location and also beautiful sea view. Also look at the possible climate risk. Climate risks are investment risks, are business risks. So, of course, carbon is part and parcel of the whole climate risk. And for Singapore, we are hitting up twice as fast as other part of the world. So we do look at cooling the space is very, very important. And calculating carbon is almost our top priority. The 3 things that we are looking at is decarbonization is number 1 that we have to deliver. Digitalization and innovation is number 2. You have to look at how we design right from day 1 that it can help us reduce heat gain. So we need AI, we need digital solution. And the last but not least is, disclosure and communication. What get measured, get managed. So if you don't disclose, how are you going to talk to your stakeholders and investors? So these are the 3 areas, yeah.
And you didn't put me on the spot, Joe. We're actually seeing that happening. We have markets where we have clients who are requesting that kind of budget already. But we're also seeing how some of our project teams are setting up internal, unofficial carbon budgets for themselves, because they are keen on supporting our group climate targets, and they have actually, we're engineers, so they're breaking down all the amounts of carbon that we're allowed to emit to be able to reach our target, and then they're just dividing that out to each project. So we're seeing that happening, informally and formally. So tomorrow?
Tomorrow. Well, that gives us hope. And Scandinavia tends to be one of the most progressive.
But this isn't just in Scandinavia. I would say it's in Central Europe and in the US market too. So things are happening, definitely.
Yeah, so everyone needs to wake up. In Africa, are you seeing net zero being something that's been requested by developers, by governments when they put out specifications? Or is it still just a case of cost being the main currency, Lisa?
Unfortunately, it's still a case of cost, but we when I said it's a stepwise process, we've got sort of some of the biggest cities, they have got a green building policy. So one of the things they've started is that you won't be able to build new in some of the C40 cities if you don't build at least green. So it's not net zero, but it's a huge step in what we have had before, that it's not just about cost. There is some thought going into it. There's some cities have put sort of rebates on your rates for being green. So there's some incentives that are happening, but as I said, it's not quite to the net zero carbon stage, but it's a good start, and it's much further than we've been before. And I think if we look at our history, I mean, the first green building certification was done in 2007, and now what would have been a sort of 4-star building is now a business as usual type building. It's a normal building, and so there's a pull. It's 2009, so there's a pull along the way and Esther's right. A lot of it's been through the sort of international sort of type groups. It's who wants to invest in these buildings. How are these buildings future-proofed? So we've really I think the discussion's really, it's not at an immature level, it's at a mature level, but the net zero carbon conversation is not quite at that mature level yet. So unfortunately, we still talk cost of, capital cost.
Yeah. I just wanted to open it up to the floor and ask if any of you either wanted to ask a question of any of the panel or had, something to share in terms of what you're seeing as, positive change within the industry. There's a gentleman over there. Have you got a roving mic, Luca? Yeah, thank you.
Hello, there we go. I just wanted to share kind of a measurement analogy, and that is, I do largely existing building retrofit work. And so what we've been doing for some time now is comparing a retrofit scenario to a new building replacement scenario. And it was very, very self-serving. You always come up with these, very dramatic savings, particularly in embodied carbon, because, frankly, our retrofit goal is to meet, new building contemporary operational goals. I mean, I don't accept that existing buildings shouldn't be meeting the same performance standards. But what it awakened us to is that notion of really what are your first couple of ideas about your design approach. There's oftentimes kind of multiple scenarios that you can be looking at, not just falling into what you think is the first smartest one. And that comparing that we've been doing has actually really changed our approach to the earliest thinking that we do on our projects.
Thank you very much for sharing that. The light is terrible, so please I'm relying on you, Luca, because I can't see properly from here.
Luca, thank you. Andrew Minson from the Global Cement and Concrete Association. So I just would add that we've heard a lot about materials and the positive, Joe, that you asked to hear. As you know, we published 3 weeks ago on behalf of 80% of the cement producers globally outside China, plus with producers in China, a commitment to net zero by 2050, but also action now with milestones to 2030. And having been heavily involved personally in delivering that, I'm here now to hear this, to be involved in the process of customers demanding product, because the producers want to have the demand signals. Mike, you got it right in terms of those demand signals. So we're here to listen and to learn and to work with you and to collaborate on this journey.
Thank you, Andrew. I think there was somewhere in the middle, I can vaguely see a hand, and then one more here.
Hi there, David Maguire from Foster & Partners. I just wanted to mention that I kind of echo Anna in that we're actually beginning to see clients come to us with hard carbon targets. Often they don't quite know what they're asking or what they mean, which I'm sure you're also finding. But it's very encouraging to see that. And I think, to Esther's point, it's not just regulation, therefore, which is pushing us forward. It's actually the money. Investment seems to be, because of their own ESG targets, pushing designers to move ahead in that way. One thing I would ask is, as someone who tends to find myself at the early stage of the design process, we build our own tools in this regard, but we often find that industry tools to calculate and even estimate embodied carbon are lacking at those early stages. So what do you think the next steps are in that kind of early design stage to help us as kind of architects, I guess?
Can I just hold that question and just take the last question, and then we'll do a final round?
Thank you very much. My name is Íñigo Orbañano, CEO of my name is Íñigo Orbañano, CEO of Convive, a housing company in Mexico, social housing, houses of around $20,000. And we have just received a certification of EDGE IFC and net zero ready certification. We're a unique case in Mexico and around the world. And the biggest challenge has been finding climate finance. Additional to design and technology. So my question is, what would you suggest to a company like us that is building around 1,000 houses with this idea of going to net zero? How could we find climate finance to make our goal happen?
Thank you for both those questions. So that from two ends of the spectrum, one is as designers, how can we get better access to tools to calculate embodied energy? And in my experience, it's not so much the tools, it's actually the data on the embodied energy associated with different materials. And secondly, the access to climate finance. We're told there's lots of money out there, but how do organizations like this gentleman's access that climate finance? Esther, would you like to?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Actually, we have the honors to issue the first green bond in Singapore in 2017 April, and we pledged it to, to green an existing building. So since then, we have been actively using sustainability-linked loan and various vehicles, and we have talked about 3 billion worth of, sustainable finance. You need money, right? Technologies are there, but it doesn't come free. So how do we, find fundings for that? And unfortunately, I'm not familiar with Mexico, but in Singapore and the ASEAN region, sustainable finance has growing really, really fast. And I think if you talk to the banks and all that, 5 years ago when I issued the first green bond, when I talk to them about green building, they look at you like, what are you talking about? But today they are very savvy, and because the climate action is moving so fast. And similarly, just now the gentleman, also 4 years ago when I talked to one of our biggest cement supplier about sustainable cement, they're like, what are you talking about, you know? But today, there are actually a lot more options. And even Indonesia, we are actually looking at sustainable steel as well. So they're looking at RE to furnish steel rather than, things are moving really, really fast over the past few years. In my own 20 years of journey, I never seen things move so fast over the last 20 months, yeah.
Any comments on the tools from?
Yeah, so I'll just comment on the tools side of things. Yeah, again, I mean, I sort of agree with Joe there in terms of data. So again, another thing that we can really do is start pushing for things like environmental product declarations. Again, you know, common message to the value chain saying that we want those. That will be a great help so that we've got the data. Then in terms of tools, I mean, yeah, there's tools and tools, but I mean, I remember first doing this on very simple spreadsheets. You know, when you've got your initial bill of materials, bill of quantities, you know, you've got your price, you've got the quantities of materials, and then if you've got some basic data on the carbon intensity of that material, whether it's through an EPD or some other source, then you know where your big numbers are. It's pretty intuitive now, I think. You know, we know where our big numbers are. So you could use that to get an initial, fairly early stage carbon budget, I would say. I wouldn't be too hung up about the tools at that stage, personally, but I don't know if anybody else has got any thoughts.
No, and I can just, I agree, but I think ask, because I think it's maybe not the tools, but it's the data. And Chris knows asking for data is not always easy, but we want to be transparent with it, and we want to share as much, because that's the only way for us to actually change, if we are transparent and share the knowledge and data that we have. So please ask.
That's a lovely positive note to end on, Anna. Thank you. And I'd like to sort of thank everyone for coming today to listen to the panel. And my colleague Chris, and to all of those who are dialing into this online. I'd like to just leave you with a reminder that this is not just about where we need to get to in 2050, or the fact in 2030 we need to halve emissions so that we're on that trajectory to 2050. It's about what we do next week, next year, and over the next 3 years, both within our own organizations, but also joining hands with others, being open, being transparent, sharing. We're all in it together, and we'll dig our way out of it together. Thank you. And I'll just hand back to Luca.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think that was an excellent panel, excellent input before. So again, thank you very much. So please, just maybe as a reminder, measure all life carbon and share the data. Set target and report it. So really that we work on the target and the collaboration. So I think this is really kind of very important information that not only today, I think that's been part of this COP for long. And Thursday 11th is going to be the City, Region and Built Environment Day. So that's going to be also the day where the built environment will be even more visible in the COP, because the 40% matter. So thank you very much. Let's do it together. Thank you also, Lisa, from South Africa.
Thank you.